if I was studying for, say, 3 hours, reviewing several hundred slides for an exam, and then I switched over to working on Med 6, that was actually a quasi break for me. Like, it wasn't me just doing more work and me getting more burnt out. It actually gave me some recovery, so then I could then study another 2 hours for the exam.
Welcome to the Physician Pharmacist Podcast, a show designed to shed some light on a very unusual pathway into medicine. I'm your host, Nathan Gartland, and I'm a licensed pharmacist and fourth-year medical student. I'm also the author of PharmD to MD and the owner of the Physician Pharmacist Company. As this podcast has grown, we've had the tremendous opportunity to broaden our scope and explore other non-traditional pharmacy careers. The PharmD opens so many doors, and by listening in, you will have the opportunity to learn from experts in the field and how to start your journey today. Before we start with today's interview, I'd like to announce that we are actively searching for new guests to interview on the podcast. If you think you have a unique story or interesting life experience related to medicine, pharmacy, or business, please reach out for the potential to be a guest on the show. I'm thrilled to introduce today's exceptional guest, Dr. Geoff Bocobo. Dr. Bocobo is a physician who recently graduated from the University at Buffalo and has moved into the unique sector of management consulting. He also has an extensive background in biomedical research, is the co-founder of a venture-backed medical technology startup, and has many stints in venture capital. His diverse interests span medicine, business, and technology with a focus on advancing human well-being on a large scale. Geoff's impressive background also includes experiences at the likes of NASA, Stanford, as well as a history of being an accomplished track and field athlete. His contributions to biomedical research and entrepreneurial endeavors make him a standout guest on our podcast. Today, we'll delve into Geoff's journey and his insights at the intersection of medicine, business, and technology. Alrighty, Geoff, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on today.
For sure, Nate. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So let's take things way back to the beginning. Where are you from, and what did your early career look like prior to going to medical school?
Yeah, definitely. Happy to chat about my background. So I grew up in Philadelphia, born and raised until undergrad, of course. But if anybody knows where Villanova University is, that is the area that I grew up in. I ended up going off to Trinity College in Connecticut. As I had mentioned, I studied neuroscience there in undergrad. Another large part of my quote-unquote undergrad career was also running track and field. So I was a sprinter and hurdler, and also, and I guess, just ran for 4 years there. So that was a large part of my experience there that I enjoyed a lot. Subsequent to that, I actually moved to Boston, and I wanted to, I guess, quote unquote, get real world experience, but also bolster my application for medical school. At the time, I wasn't in a rush to go to medical school, so I decided to do research in Boston, live with a few of my friends that were actually in a similar industry, in the research industry, but also in the finance field. So kind of get a sneak peek of adult life. So I moved to Boston, ended up working at Brigham and Women's Hospital under a brilliant cardiologist scientist, Dr. Paul Yu. And I'm going to oversimplify this here, but we studied this pathway called the BMP signaling pathway. And in that pathway, there is kind of two ways it can go and two disease states that we study. Basically, an overexpression of certain aspects of that pathway will lead to this genetic heterotopic ossification disorder. What I mean by that is basically, of course, it's an inherited disorder, but trauma and other kind of inflammatory insults to the body of these patients causes their soft tissues to ossify. It has a very long name. It's in short, it's called FOP, but it stands for fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. And then the other aspect of the pathway, so the other area we studied and the main disease state that my PI studied was pulmonary arterial hypertension. So when there's an underexpression of certain aspects of the pathway, and as I mentioned, if there's any pulmonary hypertension and musculoskeletal experts in here, this is a large oversimplification of the genetics and the underlying causes of and underlying pathobiology of these diseases. But basically, underexpressing aspects of that causes a certain type of pulmonary arterial hypertension. So in that experience, it was really awesome to learn through, in vitro research, in vivo, animal model research, and clinical research, how to creatively and critically think and analyze data, create the data, and kind of draw conclusions from the data in order to understand these disease states better and actually create some therapeutics to combat these disease states. So amazing experience doing research there. I was there from 2016, end of 2016 to the beginning of 2019, or sorry, till mid 2019. So about a little more than 2.5 years. But what's funny is, although that was an amazing experience, the most formative aspect so far related to what I'm doing today was actually not the research, but it was actually learning about what healthcare innovation was. So in Boston, there were 3 evening courses I took that really led me to be more and more excited about what healthcare innovation is and how we can impact patients outside of purely biomedical research and outside of purely clinical medicine. So how to impact populations on a larger scale. The first one was called Harvard HIC, Healthcare Innovation and Commercialization course. And basically, this was an evening course where the organizers brought in thought leaders and key opinion leaders once a week to talk to students that had no business background about how to take a technology really from their labs, from bench to bedside. So they would talk to us about, say, pitching, creating pitch decks, regulatory, intellectual property, things such as that. So after each lecture, we actually got to network with these experts and learn about their own career paths, which was really awesome. But what made that course interesting was halfway through the semester, they split us up all onto teams and assigned us a real Harvard teaching hospital technology to make our own. And so treating that technology as our own prototype, as our own invention, was a really fun experience doing market research and presenting our findings at the end. I worked on a digital psychiatry mobile app being developed out of Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. I mentioned 2 other courses that got me really excited about healthcare innovation. One was Harvard Biotech Incubator, where some folks at Dana-Farber actually were working on CAR T cells, and I got to, on certain CAR T cell technology, and I got to build business plans and product profile sheets and kind of help them with creating use cases for that amazing technology. And then finally, and subsequent to that, I did the Harvard Biodesign course. This is created off the template of Stanford Biodesign, which is a very famous biodesign course where you learn how to needs find and kind of solution from there. And basically through that, I had this problem statement where how do you more accurately in the operating room assess margins for non-palpable breast cancer? So on another interdisciplinary team, I got to really quote unquote solution and create a solution to that problem. So it was something that combined AR and AI and VR. That was kind of what our solution was comprised of, and we got to also pitch that to venture capitalists at the end in a mock kind of fake pitch. But it was a really nice experience. After that, we're fast forwarding to around 2019, beginning of 2019. I actually did an innovation fellowship at Neurolex Labs, which is at the time they were building a vocal neurobiomarker platform to create patients with certain psychiatric illnesses with providers more efficiently. So that was an amazing experience. I got to work on another interdisciplinary team with the chief medical officer of the company, a computer scientist, and a resident psychiatrist. So really great experience there. And then finally, I learned from all of that I didn't want to just learn about these, but I wanted to actually do something in the health innovation world. So next I got into medical school in March 2019, but at the same time, I actually met somebody that would be my future co-founder for a medical technology company that I would end up co-founding with him. This is called Med6, and I was the 3rd member of that team. There were 4 co-founders in total, and we were trying to make surgical drains smart. I'll tell you more about that later, but starting in April of 2019 all the way to January of 2020, so during my M1 year, I was moonlighting. The rest of the co-founders were moonlighting. I personally was working on business development, pitch deck development, speaking with key opinion leaders in the health economics field, doing market research on my own. And it all culminated January 2020. I actually was able to identify a venture capital firm in Boston that ended up funding us for a pre-seed round. So that was great. That gave us a lot of runway. We were able to hire engineers, create a prototype, run an animal trial in swine, so large animal trial, and then get approved for a clinical trial as well as the NSF National Science Foundation Innovation Corps program. So amazing experience, and happy to talk more about that if you'd like to hear more. But that's kind of what my career looked like from 2016 to 2019 after undergrad, but before med school.
Wow. I mean, there's so much to unpack there, right there. But I think it's fascinating. So you were able to do all of this while starting medical school too. And so, you talked a little bit about medical, like Med Six. What was the product that you were trying to introduce to the market?
Yeah, definitely happy to talk more about that. So, as I mentioned, we were trying to make surgical drains smart. That was like our sexy one-liner, so to speak. But to explain it to lay folks or maybe earlier on medical students, basically what we were building, what so we were trying to automate surgical drains, as I just mentioned. So after surgeries, after many complex surgeries, the surgeon and the surgical team implants a surgical drain into the patient's body to dispose of excess fluids, just to keep this very high level and basic. And a common one is called like a JP drain, a Jackson Pratt drain. That's
Hmm.
the company that manufactures them. Now, this drain is monitored. I don't know how often by nurses, but definitely not that often in a general med surg floor. So every few hours, and then maybe twice a day tops by the resident surgical team and potentially the attending surgeon as well. But what this causes is, this is definitely sufficient practice given standard of care at the moment, but sometimes there's a delay in detecting complications, and during that time lag, um, that time lag could be removed, and we can actually intervene earlier and prevent disastrous complications. So these complications I'm speaking of are things such as bile leaks, anastomotic leaks, excess bleeding, etc. And when you catch those earlier, it kind of makes sense logically that clinical outcomes would be improved, right? So what we tried to
Hmm.
do was we wanted to leverage the paradigm of RPM, or remote patient monitoring, to kind of automate that process. So what we did was we created a small, less than 1 pound box uh, that would go right in line with a surgical drain. Inside of that was a multispectral RGB color sensor and a flow sensor. So with that, if there's anything that is not serous-sanguinous or clear coming out, we can detect the color, and we can kind of see, maybe there's a bile leak. We'll see different colors in the RGB sensor, or if there is precipitously decreased flow, that could mean that there's a blockage or a kink in the tubing. Um, if there is high flow and RGB color sensor is reading red, then that means there's probably excess bleeding. We can also detect anastomotic leaks in real time. So those were the things we were trying to detect. And I had mentioned the precipitous drop in flow, leading to the clinical team thinking of a potential kink or blockage in the tubing. What we actually were planning on adding, which we didn't end up adding, was a pressure sensor as well, which would really help with that. But that's what we were trying to do, basically, kind of automate a manual process.
Wow. I mean, I don't even know where you guys come up with the ideas for this. It's pretty fascinating. But additionally, and so you were obviously in medical school at the time. What kind of prompted you to even go to medical school in the first place? And, as this Med Six was developing, what kind of prevented you from leaving medicine and kind of working on this full time?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. To answer the first part of your question, what drew me to medicine in the first place? I had graduated undergrad, completing pre-med courses. So at the time, maybe I was what somebody would call like a blind pre-med, somebody that just completed the pre-med courses and they were intending to go to medical school, but maybe they didn't know why at the time. Maybe I was like that. I think I had good reasoning back then. But from there, I also just really enjoyed life science coursework from my neuroscience degree and doing biomedical research. So one could say, hey, well, you could have just gotten like a PhD or like just been a career research technician. True, like that probably would have been enjoyable from an academic standpoint. But the thing was, um, at the time between 2016 and 2019, I didn't mention this, but I was also volunteering at Beth Israel once a week in this new program called the ICU Transition Program. And basically, you're there for patients that would be transferred from the ICU to the general floor, or the general floor to the ICU. No, sorry, not the other way around, obviously, because that's stepping up their care, and they're not gonna worry about how comfortable the patient is when they're stepping up care. So this is a step down from ICU to the general floor when patients are healing faster. Um, Obviously, they're going to transfer them to the general med search floor when their clinical status is improved. But it's also a shock to go from one-on-one with a nurse and like a lot of visits from the different clinical care teams and all these noises and tubings on you to a med search floor where there's less oversight. Kind of the ratio is probably 1 to 4, 1 to 5, or even less in larger hospitals for nurses. So you don't have a one-on-one nurse. You're probably getting visited less by the clinical team. So it can be a shock to your system. You also don't have a you don't have the same care team necessarily. Obviously, the primary medical team is around, but your primary team goes from an ICU medical team to a primary medicine team, right? So you have different providers in there, so it creates continuity, and that continuity is us as the ICU transition volunteers, where we're there to help the patient with being empathetic and realizing they're in a difficult place and being there if they don't have family members to visit them. So I really enjoyed that one-on-one patient interaction I had at the time. So that kind of solidified my decision to want to apply to medical school on top of just enjoying life science coursework. So combining life science coursework with a true desire and true gratification of helping these patients and kind of feeling the impact that you can make in a one-on-one setting was really powerful for me. And then finally, as you can probably tell from the variety of experiences I've talked about, I just have a general love for learning. So combining those three things really made the decision clear for me to go to medical school, continue my education in that way. And then what prevented me from leaving, I always knew that the medical technology startup was going to be part-time for me, actually, because I don't think that I would go full-time unless like that technology was something that I was the CEO of, I would say. So if it was like my baby, my creation, I definitely think that I would go full-time in that way. At the time, I wouldn't have, though. I'm just saying that because because I wasn't like the primary co-founder, I was more of a part-time co-founder, third working with the fourth co-founder and the rest of the team, obviously. Since I wasn't full-time, I think that was one reason it prevented me from calling it quits for med school. But I also knew I wanted to finish medical school. And I also still know that I want to see patients in a clinical setting. So I think that it was never a question for whether I would finish medical school, honestly.
That's awesome. And obviously you did all the work to get into medical school. So you've kind of figured, sunk cost, you got to finish it.
Absolutely. Yep. That's a good point for sure.
Absolutely. And so additionally, I also want to talk a little bit about the MD Plus community and its influences it's had on your career. For our listeners who might not be familiar with this, it's basically like a platform where you can connect with other like physician innovators and other like medical students who are kind of like the frontier of medicine. So Geoff, can you tell us a little bit more, maybe expand on that definition for us?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. So MD Plus is awesome. Everybody listening to this podcast should definitely join it. It's been very formative in the continued pursuit of the continued pursuit of making an impact in healthcare and me continuing to explore healthcare innovation opportunities. MD Plus is a community, as Nate had just mentioned, of aspiring physician innovators, originally created by Sherman Leung. He's now, so it was created back in 2019, I want to say. It started off as kind of informal dinners in New York City, talking about the state of healthcare and how we can improve things. It grew really rapidly as a Slack online community during the pandemic. And now we have regional local hubs where we have social gatherings and really cool get-togethers with awesome companies, whether they be in the venture capital space or any other space. But Sherman now, just so you know for background, he's actually a Stanford emergency medicine resident and working on bio and health VC at Andreessen Horowitz. So he's doing amazing things. And he's an amazing guy. Everybody should reach out and connect with him at some point because you'll learn so much from him. And yeah, so that's what the community is about. It's really for folks to explore these fields that are tangential to clinical medicine and biomedical research. So this could include health policy, it could include healthcare consulting, it could include venture capital, startups, what have you. So all of that, if you want to explore any of that, then definitely join MD Plus. And because I'm on a podcast, I do have to shout out, last summer, I was able to start the MD Plus podcast with Luke Vest, who's now another EM resident at the University of Washington, I believe. And that has taken off, not quite as rapidly as Nate's podcast, but we try to post an episode once a month. And yeah, it's been a great experience creating that podcast. So definitely, if you need more content like Nate's awesome content here on the Physician Pharmacist Podcast, definitely tune in to the MD Plus podcast, which is, we're only 6 episodes in, so you can easily catch up on that on your commute or when you're at the gym, or, if you want to listen to some folks chit chat before bedtime.
Fantastic. Subtle plug, but MD Plus podcast is phenomenal. So you guys are doing great work over there. So very interesting
Thanks.
stories too. I got to have Sherman on the podcast too. That'd be super interesting to get him over here.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. He'd love that.
Awesome. And so obviously you're progressing through medical school at this point. You're getting involved in the MD Plus community. And so I guess like what's your favorite part of medical school and why was this the most like influential for you?
Sure. Yeah. So honestly, I would say that a big draw of medical school that you don't know until you're there are the people you meet. So meeting so many people that are smarter than you, so many people that you can learn from, so many well-rounded people, whether this be your colleague med students or whether this be attending physicians. There's so many folks that are just impressive in whatever way it is, whether it's test taking ability or working up a patient, presenting a patient, or giving teaching points about these patients you're helping care for. You'll just meet so many impressive folks from top to bottom. So I can't say anything, anything more about how amazing the people you'll work with are in medical school. So I'd say that was my favorite part, honestly, meeting these people. And even outside of the clinical medicine world, hanging out with them, doing whatever, playing golf or going out, getting a drink quickly or something like that. It's just really great people. So I'd say the people was my favorite part of medical school, still is today, even though I've graduated. And then I would say also third year was a great experience, kind of learning how clinical medicine goes. I know there's much more to learn during residency and such, but I think that third year is really when you're kind of on the job, so to speak, and working with attendings and residents very closely, as opposed to, smashing your keyboard in Anki. I didn't do Anki, but a lot of people
Neither
would do
did
that. And a lot of people, or reading through 2,000 slides 2 nights before your biochem exam. So I think third year was awesome, and being able to see how you can help a care team and impact these patients in a one-on-one setting was really phenomenal.
For sure. You couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, it's all about the people that you meet and the connections that you make. Because I think like obviously you're there to learn, but it's also there to kind of like get exposed to all of those unique people who have all those really cool backgrounds. And it's pretty fascinating to see the connections you'll have down the line.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And so at the completion of medical school, you made a really uncommon decision to forego residency training, at least for the moment. So to pursue like medical consulting. So what caused you to make this like kind of dramatic decision?
Yeah. It was really inadvertent, actually. So throughout medical school, I'd stayed kind of abreast of the latest medical innovations going on. Of course, because I was still helping run Med 6. So part of the startup, I did a small VC internship summer of 2020 for a medical technology firm. Sorry, excuse me. So I was staying abreast of these innovations happening in the field. And then I stumbled on this other opportunity that was related because I really love the intersection of healthcare, business, and technology. And I stumbled upon this consulting opportunity for one of the top management consulting firms. So as I mentioned, it was kind of inadvertent, but I submitted my application, and the interview process went on from there, and I eventually received an offer back in 2022, so halfway through my third year of med school. So really, I was never planning on it, but this opportunity landed in my lap, and I was able to execute and receive the offer. So I kind of ran with it, basically. So that's kind of how it happened. But there was also a personal decision because, right now I'm in Boston, and Boston has some of the best healthcare in the world. And I was also going to help take care of a family member's health. So it was also a personal decision for me. So a combination of a love for the intersectionality of those fields I had mentioned, business, healthcare, technology, and then also a personal decision too.
Absolutely. And
I mean, it definitely goes against the grain, as you had mentioned. And there's definitely thematic resistance. And what I mean by that is kind of the general way to go about it is you go to medical school, then you go right to residency, right? That's probably what I don't know the percentage, but probably 98 to 99% of people that want to go to residency. So like 98 to 99% of US grads will go to residency, right? Because that's just the norm. So to answer your question, for me, it wasn't difficult. I felt that it was my life. I'd taken out the loans at the time, so kind of it was my loans to pay back. So I was taking charge of my life, but I knew that I'd eventually apply to residency, and I knew that I would eventually match, and I know that I'll eventually match in a residency that will understand my circuitous path and my different story, and somebody that wants to carve their own path because of their own interests and personal aspects happening in their family. So I think that because of that, I was very confident in my decision. I was never swayed one way or the other. There was definitely that kind of thematic pushback that you don't want to do this, whether it's like reading forums online or hearing about it indirectly through like professors and preceptors and things like that, but nobody directly to me. And the reason that was because a lot of my preceptors and a lot of my mentors in med school kind of knew that I was really interested in aspects outside of purely clinical medicine. So they were honestly supportive. I was able to find a lot of support, especially at the Jacobs Institute, which is an amazing medical technology incubator, by the way, in near UB, University of Buffalo. But I was able to even find mentors that were supportive of it. So to me, it wasn't hard to explain it to folks in the medical field, and it wasn't hard to explain to my family because of course it's your family, and hopefully they'll always support the decisions you make, even if they are going against the grain or are uncommon. So I didn't experience too much resistance. No.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, thematic resistance, because I can kind of live like it makes me think back to my pharmacy days where I had tremendous mentors who kind of worked me through the whole process, and no one ever told me don't do it. But at the same time, you could kind of feel it in the air where it's some kind of like, ominous presence where it's like, are you sure? Are you sure? Or what are you doing
Yeah.
after graduation? And they say, oh, I'm going to medical school. They're like, what's wrong with pharmacy? What's wrong with residency and so on. So it's kind
Right.
of a funny experience, but so I was just kind of like thinking back and relating to that as well. And so, not to say that you're done with residency. So looking forward into the future, and after you've established yourself in the consulting world, like what kind of residency are you planning on completing? And would you even consider a fellowship too?
Yeah, definitely. I think right now, and what it's been for the past couple of years, has been internal medicine. I think that opens up a lot of pathways, and I think, well, not only that it opens up a lot of pathways, but also I wanted to be a complete doctor, in the sense of kind of knowing about the whole body system. Not that other specialties don't know about that, because they certainly do, but in that sense, I kind of wanted to be a generalist in that way. But I do want to subspecialize and do a fellowship, likely in pulmonology and potentially interventional pulmonology. The reason I say that is I've always been interested in pulm ever since working with a cardiologist on pulmonary arterial hypertension. So I was interested, although he was a cardiologist, I was actually interested in the pulmonary aspects of the disease. And I did a rotation at Mass General in pulmonary consult. So I really, really love that, and that solidified my desire to do pulm as a fellowship, likely. And of course, I have to get into internal medicine residency first. And then we actually sat behind the interventional pulmonology team, which is kind of in a niche field. I think it's a 1 to 2 year fellowship after completing a Pulm Crit fellowship. And I just think it's a super cool field. It's something you don't hear about very often, but it's basically a procedural subspecialty of internal medicine and following pulmonary critical care fellowship. So it's what I think I'll pursue down the line after a few years in consulting. Yeah.
Awesome. And I take it too that so after you had completed the medical school portion of things and decided not to go along the residency pathway, I understand that you also didn't get into consulting specifically until more recently. And so, kind of doing my research, I learned a little bit about like the Viv Collective Fellowship. And for kind of our listeners who aren't sure what that is, it's basically a platform founded in like 2021 that focuses on developing and funding and scaling digital health companies with a mission to improve access and quality of care. So how did you kind of find this position, and like what kind of experience have you taken away from it?
Definitely, yeah, happy to chat about that. So um, this is another plug for MD Plus. If I had to answer this in like one word or one phrase, it would be I found it through MD Plus. But basically, I met this phenomenal person online through MD Plus, Kathy Koo. She actually reached out into the MD Plus network about asking about hospital supply chain management, I believe at the time. And at the time, I was serving on the value analysis committee of Kaleida Health, which is discreetly interactive with hospital supply chain. So I wanted to kind of offer whatever knowledge I could offer Kathy about hospital supply chain management. So, she put the request out, and I think our asks and offers chat, if that was, or a channel, if that was available back then. And I replied to her and I said, I know a little bit, at least a little bit about hospital supply chain management. So we chatted for 30 minutes about that and was able to offer a little bit of insight. But, a year later, after that coffee chat, I just reached out cold to her because she had had one VC fellow come on before me. And I asked her, are you open to taking on another VC fellow at this time? Because my consulting start date, although we were told it would probably, well, we weren't told it would start in August, but basically I put my preference down to start in August following graduating medical school. And lo and behold, I ended up starting January 2024. So 6 months later, 7 months later. So I told her, I reached out and I said, I have this background. I love the intersectionality of those fields I've been talking about throughout this whole podcast. And, she, after, a short interview, she was nice enough to offer me the position. She checked with the rest of the team at that VC firm, and they were okay with it. So ever since then, I had been working with them, and I actually just had my offboarding call last night where I kind of wrapped up all my projects. So, well, my projects have been wrapped up for the last month, but I kind of just wrapped up my time at Vive. It's actually Vive Collective. So, yeah, I found it through the MD Plus community and just reached out cold after meeting Kathy electronically, I guess. And just to give a shout out to her, she's amazing. I got to work with her in kind of an apprenticeship model where she was the only venture capitalist I was working with at the firm. I did end up working with another physician briefly at the firm, but mainly with Kathy. But she is amazing. She didn't do residency either, but she's obviously a VC investor right now. She is an MD MBA from Stanford, so really, really impressive background, and founded a startup actually not in the healthcare world and not domestically in South Korea. I believe she was living in Seoul, South Korea, and she was on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. So have to give her a shout out because it's been awesome working with her for the past 7 months, and she is super accomplished. So another person that would be great for folks to connect with off this podcast, or maybe even have her on at some point.
It's funny. You could probably have never envisioned that one message you sent like casually on like a Tuesday afternoon would lead to a fellowship opportunity a whole year later. So it's kind of puts it in perspective to, have, I guess, when you reach out to people, those interactions have meaning and you never know where life's going to take you. So it's pretty fascinating. And
absolutely.
So
yeah.
As a fellow, like what did your average day look like?
Yeah, it really varied. It was a part-time role. I didn't want a full-time role because I wanted time to visit friends in various parts of the country, visit my family who's also in various parts of the country. So I wanted to be able to kind of enjoy time off after graduating, grueling medical school, and not right there attending residency. So I wanted some time off, but I also wanted to work and as I've been talking about, stay abreast of medical innovation. So, excuse me. So Vive Collective is actually a digital health growth firm. What growth means is kind of they invest in the growth stage. So not what you would think of a classic VC firm that might invest in the earlier stages, so in the hundreds of thousands to low $1 million. So growth is like kind of later stage, like maybe Series B, Series C. So we invest, or Vive, I can't say we anymore because I'm not part of the firm anymore, but Vive invests in companies that are kind of have traction already and have a lot of contracts with whatever it might be, healthcare providers, et cetera. But I digress. What my day-to-day looked like was really just a good mix of supporting the portfolio companies with their needs, performing due diligence on future companies that Vive might be interested in investing in, and performing market research for certain areas that might have white space that companies could come in and impact and might be a ripe company to invest in. And also just like meeting these founders on these calls after you identified a company or if they reach out to the firm. So it's really a solid mix of all of those things.
Awesome. So it sounds like you had a wide variety of different opportunities, and obviously you kind of got to fine tune a lot of those different skills. So, I mean, that's something that like I would consider like pursuing at some point, or just to get like kind of exposure to that.
You should.
And, for any of the pharmacists who are kind of listening into the podcast right now, like, is this an opportunity that's specific just to physicians, or are there opportunities for pharmacists or pharmacy students to even get involved in, Viv or all alternative companies with similar roles, I suppose?
Yeah, I think that there's always opportunities for anybody to get involved with anything. That's what I truly believe. If you want something, you can get it. If you are resourceful enough and you try hard enough, I think that there's no, especially in this day and age, I think there's less gatekeeping, I feel like, and I think if you enjoy a field, you should pursue it, and you'll eventually land an opportunity. And I would definitely recommend folks to do an opportunity such as this because if a pharmacy is interested in broadening their knowledge, then a great way to do it would be, healthcare or potentially identifying companies that could be ready for investing and supporting a VC firm. It's funny you mentioned pharmacists, and you are one obviously, and this is a physician pharmacist podcast. But one of Veeve's portfolio companies was actually in the pharmacy space, working on prior auths and kind of helping optimize that process. So it's just coincidence you mentioned that.
Fantastic. And so let's take things up to like current day right now. So I also hear you've obviously taken the new position in consulting. And for our listeners who may be unfamiliar, Geoff is currently working at one of the firms that's considered like one of the big three international management consultancies. And there's a few different ones, but they're basically highly sought after companies with like a renowned global reach for consulting services. And these firms offer like a wide variety of services, including like strategic advisement, innovation, growth, and like operational improvement. So with all that in mind, the whole concept though itself of like what is consulting is kind of nebulous to myself and maybe to the viewers. So Geoff, can you provide us with more like of a formal definition of what a physician consultant really does?
Definitely, yeah, and I think it remains nebulous even uh, in this day and age, still, even for folks that have been in the field for a long time. But for me, I'll have to get back to you on that because I just started 2 weeks ago. But you can think of it as analyzing a business's, I guess, current overall state and the overall picture of the business in order to optimize certain business functions. See, I already sound like such a consultant here by saying all those things. In order to optimize certain business functions and processes that could, for example, increase revenue. So really kind of taking a company's problem, looking deeply into the issue, seeing if it's really an issue, seeing if the management of that company, what the management of that company believes is the problem is really the problem, and then kind of coming up with a plan for them to implement later on that could potentially solve that problem. So very broad strokes there. I know that that's very broad, but I've also only started a couple weeks ago and just learning about some business essentials. That's the area that's the training module I'm in right now, learning about the essentials of business, as I just said. Um, but I'll have to get back to you on that one, honestly.
Absolutely. And, from, I guess, like my definition, I guess that's kind of like
Absolutely, yeah.
the rough definition for me.
You answered it better than I could. I kind of left out the physician aspect because you asked about physician consultant. I kind of gave more of the consultant definition, but you're absolutely right. Coming from an advanced degree that's not formally business trained, but adding the business training to folks with that PhD or with the MD, or the pharmacy degree, synergizing those two will create a diverse perspective. So you really put that much better than I even did.
So additionally too, if someone was like interested in getting involved in like a position similar to your own or getting to like consulting as is, like what makes like a good applicant or like what makes someone a competitive applicant to apply into like a process like what you're in currently?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that if you just show that you truly have a passion for a certain field, and I don't just mean in the interview, but showing it through your previous coursework plus work experiences, that's something that will help shine through. Being a good communicator is obviously very important, but what really helps differentiate you from the pack is having that advanced degree in a life science field. So MD, PhD, PharmD, DPhil, whatever it might be, that will help you because unfortunately, these top three firms, MBB, McKinsey, BCG, and Bain, they do usually recruit at the MBA level and even the undergrad level from Ivy League universities and other elite universities. So I think what differentiates you is good work experience, but what really will help is that advanced degree. And there's pathways that kind of decrease friction for you to be able to get an opportunity to potentially work for a firm like that if you do have these advanced degrees. Um, but it is very competitive, but I don't think that anybody should count themselves out.
Absolutely. And I've also seen in my experience, a lot of pharmacists are actually getting their MBA on the side too. So that would be like the perfect way to kind of, find your avenue in doing like major like consulting and whatnot. Is kind of using the MBA, but also providing the pharmacy background, which not a lot of people necessarily have in those
Hmm.
particular roles. So could be another
I totally
potential
agree.
avenue for the listeners to consider.
For sure.
Alrighty, so we're getting close to the end of the interview today, and I know we have so much more obviously to talk about. We could obviously talk about it for many hours and getting into the nitty gritty details, but to keep things kind of, superficial at this point, like how do you maintain a quality work-life balance in this demanding profession? And what other tips can you provide to the listeners to also achieve the same balance?
Yeah, absolutely. It will sound cliche, but work hard, play hard. I don't mean that in the classic sense, but really be present in what you're doing. So if you're working, work really hard. If you're doing something else, be very present in the moment. So whether it is, maybe you're at dinner with your family, going out to a nice restaurant, or just like hanging out at your mom's house, or whatever it might be, just be really present in the moment and enjoy yourself then. Whether if you're going to the gym or getting drinks with friends, like really be present in those moments and don't be on your phone like emailing somebody back. It could seem efficient, but it will really detract from that moment of what you're doing. And at the same time, when you're doing work, you don't want to be like texting your friends about going out or something. I mean, you sometimes have to because like you're finishing up studying for, I don't know, physiology exam or something. So sometimes you have to, but really try to segment and separate and compartmentalize aspects of your life. And I think that will really help folks be high achievers, and that will really help folks in demanding professions and folks that consider themselves very busy. And then a tip for just like if you have a full plate in terms of workload and you're caring less about, not that you're caring less about work-life balance, because you always need to kind of go out, get drinks with your friends. You always need to pick up a basketball, shoot around or something, and you always need to kind of visit your family. Like you always need those moments of decompression and doing things outside of your career. But if you are in like a very busy week or something like that, where you're working, say, on coursework and you're working on an internship or a startup or something like that, switching between those types of works are really helpful, those workflows. So if I was studying for, say, 3 hours reviewing several hundred slides for an exam, and then I switched over to working on Med 6, that was actually a quasi break for me. Like it wasn't me just doing more work and me getting more burnt out. It actually gave me some recovery, so then I could then study another 2 hours for the exam. And then after that, I could switch back and do work and have, say, a coffee chat with another founder to learn about their experiences and how I could bring that and offer insights to the Med 6 C-suite and management team. So I think switching between work streams is also another way of really optimizing yourself to get work done.
Absolutely. You couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, at this point, like essentially it's like disciplined compartmentalization where, like you're saying, you have to literally sit there for X amount of hours and only focus on that one particular thing, but obviously then switch over and do something different at that point. And I think that, like you're saying, that goes very, very far and will make you far more efficient down the line. So I think those are great tips for sure. And so kind of building off that as well, do you have any like last minute recommendations to like students or graduates who are interested in pursuing a similar career to your own?
Definitely. Yeah, I have a few. One is I would say explore now, because in your 20s you can make mistakes. You can have several career paths and several almost mini careers in your 20s, but it's going to be harder to do that once you've built your own brand when you're in your 40s or 50s and onward and you're getting close to retirement age. So I would say kind of explore now. Another thing I would say is, and a lot of like the med student listeners will laugh at this one, but really like don't be a gunner, because like people remember people that are purely gunners and people that put the blinders on and don't care about their colleagues and kind of just want to get the 99 on the test. It's really not worth it. Like not from personal experience, because like I was always turned off by people that were like that, but really just don't be a gunner, because people will not only remember that, but it really just won't serve you well. It kind of will probably isolate you in certain ways. So don't do that. Be resourceful. So as you could tell, I'm lucky enough to have had a lot of great experiences, but as you also know, I'm not from like an Ivy League background. I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't go to Brown Med School or anything like that. So just be resourceful in terms of your network and the resources around you. And what I mean by that is you don't have to be like being at those amazing schools is amazing. Like you'll have kind of some of these opportunities laid in your lap, and you'll get it. You'll get that venture fellowship. You'll get that consulting position because your network is so strong and they do on-campus recruiting. But what I mean by use your network and be resourceful for the resources around you is there are people in your network that are connected with people in those industries, and they can help you. For example, the MD Plus network, I was never joining that to land a VC internship, but I was nice enough to have a chat with somebody and be honest about, hospital supply chain management. And a year later, as you know, they offered me a VC fellowship position. So use your network in that way. Be resourceful in the way that, as you know, as I mentioned, not an Ivy League school, UB Med School, still a great medical school, but nobody would think that there's an elite medical technology incubator like a stone's throw away from the med school. So Jacobs Institute, there's amazing neurosurgeons there that are interested and invested in medical technology development for vascular disease. So really, just use your resources around you. They're there wherever you're not looking. And then another thing is know your potential, but always understand that there's going to be somebody in the room or somebody in the school or somebody in the city that is better than you at the thing you're trying to do, and is more accomplished. So not saying that to discourage anyone, but if you know that, but you also know your potential, then you'll realize the value of mentorship and learning from others. And I don't mean mentorship from an old head that's in their ivory tower that will give you short advice here and there, but I mean kind of mentorship at any level. Even somebody younger than you could teach you about, for example, like the prior auth space or whatever it might be. If they're a pharmacist, for example, and maybe I wanted to learn more about that space and how digital health companies are impacting that space. So that will teach you the value of mentorship. And then lastly, like we all learned this in kindergarten, but golden rule, I would say, nobody likes mean people. Treat others as you like to be treated, from your family to your friends to your colleagues, to like literally everybody, to the strangers on the street, homeless people around you. Like treat them how you would want to be treated if you were them. And I know that makes sense to everybody, but a lot of times I think a lot of people in the world forget that. So I would say that is like maybe the most important rule. So those are my recommendations. Take it or leave it. That's what I'd say.
Absolutely. And, kind of like listening to what you were saying right there, it makes me think about a couple quotes where talking about like the potential, and you should never, like the quote kind of like, I'm going to butcher this, but it basically goes, you should never be the smartest person in the room, because therefore you're
Absolutely.
usually not learning anything. So, and then additionally, your personality is kind of the combination of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so you should surround yourself with a circle of individuals who are in places, in positions where you would like to be in the future, because they're going to have influence that's going to rub off on you. And 100%. I think that's like just really good advice. And
For
so
sure,
kind of closing things out, what are your personal, professional, or business oriented goals that you would like to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, definitely work at the management consultancy I'm at for a couple of years, get that experience, because I've heard being at one of these top 3 firms for 1 year or 2 years is worth triple that in the normal world. So like they say like 2 years there is kind of like 4 or 6 years. I forgot what the actual multiplier is, but they say it's such good business training, especially for myself that doesn't have an MBA or anything like that. So I would say, work at that management consultancy for a bit, and then pursue residency, because I know I want to see patients, and I know I want to be a doctor in the not too distant future. So that's my 5 to 5, probably closer to 5-year plan. And then I'm working on a few other personal pursuits that you'll probably have to wait and hear through a different medium. But yeah, just we'll see.
Sounds
that's all I
great.
have for you, though.
Alrighty, so we've come to the end of our interview, and I'd like to thank all of our listeners for the support. If you have any additional questions about the medical school journey or venture capital, check out my website at www.physicianpharmacist.com. As a reminder, we are actively looking for additional podcast guests to interview on the show. If you believe you have a unique story that you could be beneficial to listeners, or know someone who could be a quality candidate, please reach out to me personally on LinkedIn or leave a message on my website. Before we let you go, Geoff, how can our listeners learn more about you or get in touch?
Yeah, definitely. So definitely feel free to ping me on LinkedIn. If you join the MD Plus community, I'm fairly active in that Slack as well. Maybe if Nate posts this on his website, I'd be happy to post my contact info at some point, but feel free to shoot me an email as well. I actually think that one of my emails that I use a bit less is embedded in my LinkedIn. So maybe instead of posting my email, the bots won't find it, and you'll all find it if you go digging in my LinkedIn. It's actually in the contact info section, I think. So if you email me at that email, then Yeah, basically. So I guess LinkedIn and then MD Plus also. So those two, I'll just default to those first two answers.
Absolutely. We'll just force everyone to join MD Plus then.
Yeah, yeah. Nobody will have a bad time there. It's an amazing, amazing community, both virtually and in person.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I recognize you're extremely busy, obviously starting this new position. So I really do appreciate your time today.
For sure. Thank you, Nate. It was awesome.
All right. Take care, man.